What is a complete human? Is it a cover model? Is it a science geek? Is it a fitness expert? Or all of the above and more? Jana and Evan are crusaders that walk the earth looking at today's issues that touch our hearts and minds. The honest and hopeful outlook on the advancement of today's society. The science behind the decay of human relationships. The necessary preparations for future generations. Join us as we look deep inside ourselves and embark on a journey into becoming a complete human.
All right, Erika, so welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We are too. We have actually had the pleasure of taking your test. And before we get into that, what we'd like to do is just have you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about you and your company and why you decided to do what you're doing.
Excellent. All right. So Erika Angle. I have a PhD in biochemistry. I'm an undergrad degree from MIT. I am a kind of a gut nerd. And that is because all throughout my life, I've suffered from a variety of different gut related issues. Now, as I've gotten older and potentially entering perimenopause and all these other lovely kind of sides of life, gut health has just become more and more important. Becoming the CEO of a company, of course, dealing with stress and coping with all these various new changes physiologically, gut health has really been front of mind. So how did I get into this? In many ways, it was a little bit of a serendipitous finding. So after getting my PhD, I sat down with one of my professors who is at this point now in his late 70s, early 80s. And his entire life has been about trying to figure out how to personalize healthcare for the masses, for everybody. How do you help people to learn about themselves, to figure out what do they need to do in order to stay healthy and feel better longer? And so the conversation started there. And as we started to dig into the data, we started to find some pretty interesting trends connecting overall health and even very specific disease states and disease health with the gut microbiome. And ultimately that is, in a nutshell, we can spend more time if necessary, but in a nutshell, how we got interested in the microbiome. And then we said, all right, we're going to start a company that allows us to test people, give them information, and allow them to make actionable choices to improve their gut health and to have a better quality of life. So that's how Excella got started.
I definitely want to dig deeper into that, but before we do, let's answer the fundamental question, which I think most people, need to have answered, especially going into the show, is what the hell is a microbiome?
Great question. Lots of people ask me that all the time. So the digestive system is made up of your mouth, your esophagus, your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine. The gut microbiome is essentially all of I call them critters, but all of the critters that live inside of your digestive system. So that's going to be bacteria of all kinds, fungi, viruses, cells, the trillions of different microorganisms that all live in Darwinian competition with each other. So you have all kinds of these different critters living in there, all trying to survive, and they're pushing on each other to figure out who stays, who grows, who doesn't. And so much of what makes gut microbiome health important is just making sure that you have a diverse microbiome where you have a little bit of all different kinds of these critters living in there. But it's basically those microorganisms that live in your digestive tract.
Interesting.
And of course, there's with the microbiome and with all these bacteria, there can be an overgrowth of some, and that causes issues, right? So how do people actually find out if they have a good or a bad microbiome?
Yeah. We talk about good and bad bacteria, but in reality, it's not so simple. Let's say we'll pick one like E. coli. And you say, all right, you don't want to have too much E. coli is bad. And that's the case, but not enough or no E. coli is bad too. So it's like you mentioned, it's all about balance. It's all about knowing, do I have enough of the protective ones versus the invasive ones? And how do you know that? Well, there are a variety of different ways. Obviously, with our test, and the Excella test is a pinprick blood test that looks at certain key nutrients that are either spat out by certain bacteria in the gut, both the protectives as well as some of the more invasives, and other nutrients that are taken in when you eat, and they're digested, and then ultimately they get absorbed through your small intestine and then spat out into your into your blood, into your systemic circulation. But you can measure these molecules, and they can tell you ultimately, do you have enough of the protective, the more positive bacteria, or do you have too many of the more negative bacteria, and thus you need to go and adjust the quote dysbiosis. So that's the word we use, is the dysbiosis. So that's one type of test. I mean, there are other types of tests, breath tests of different types that tell you if you have bacterial overgrowth. There are different types of tests on the market depending on what problem you're specifically trying to address.
And I definitely want to get into that, Erika, because I think one of the things that most people have come to expect when we talk about the microbiome is I'm going to have to send my poop into a lab. It's kind of funny. I've done a couple of those tests, and as it's not fun. Like, let's start with that.
What do you mean?
I don't like collecting that. So let's, hands off to any person in the medical industry who's that's their job. But I definitely want to address your test, because when we first started talking, I was fascinated by how your research and your technology really allowed us to look at things that test, usually the fecal sample didn't. So I'd love for you to address kind of the differences and what that kind of means as it pertains to your test.
Absolutely. I know that the collection device they use for stool sample test is called a hammock. And ever since I've done it as well, obviously, to try these different products. Ever since, I never look at a hammock the same way after having experienced that. So, again, I think it's important to first start by saying there is no one test that does everything. So I'm not going to purport that what we do is, solves all problems, but I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish with the tests, and different tests, right, have different purposes. So I'm happy to talk about all of them. So stool sample testing, what is it good for? What is it not good for? Parasitology, do I have parasites in my stool? If you have just morbid curiosity with what is in your stool, maybe there's certain molecules. Do I have cholesterol? Do I have blood? Or maybe you just want to know what bacteria are in your stool. And I underline that, are in your stool, because not all the bacteria in the gut come out in your stool every time you go to the bathroom. That would be very bad. That would, you die. Ultimately, if every time you went to the bathroom, your entire microbiome exited, this would be a problem. So I think from the perspective of knowing these things, then it makes sense, to take that sample. If you are trying to assess, do I have the right types of bacteria in the gut to keep me healthy? Are they doing the right thing, right? And when I say doing the right thing, I mean, are they digesting, breaking down, the nutrients that I need in my diet in order to keep me healthy? You can't measure that in the stool. And that's because, say you've eaten a taco for lunch, it's in your stomach, it's being broken down, it goes into the small intestine, it starts being absorbed, right? So the microbiome, both in your small and large intestine, but especially in your small intestine, breaks down the nutrients, they get absorbed through the intestinal lining, and then those nutrients are shuttled into your blood, and ultimately go and do what they need to do to fuel your brain, to build your organs, to build your hair, your nails, whatever else it needs to do. The waste product, everything undigested, continues into the colon. Water gets pulled out. That's stool. So you can't take your stool, look at it, and tell somebody that they need to eat more apples. It doesn't make more sense, right? So you have to measure that in a more, what's the real lifetime way of doing that? Well, you measure it in the blood, because the question is, let's say you've eaten an apple. Is that apple actually being digested and absorbed through the small intestine? Do you see the building blocks in the blood, right? Am I getting them? And from there, you can assess, is it because I'm not eating enough of certain nutrients in my diet? Or is it because my gut is damaged and it's not actually able to absorb these things? Is it because my microbiome is, in a state of dysbiosis and I'm not able to absorb that? But you can't measure that effectively in the stool. It just doesn't make sense. So in addition to it being not so fun to actually collect that sample, it doesn't serve that purpose as well. So I think there's, and that's where the Excella test, it being a blood test, these nutrients, right? You can see, well, do I have enough protein in my diet? You look in the blood, what's your protein level? If it's too low, you can say, all right, maybe 1, maybe it's because I'm not eating enough protein, but maybe 2, if some of the other markers are showing that I have a gut dysbiosis, I don't have enough of the good bacteria, I need to heal that gut, you can go and solve that problem first rather than just looking at the nutritional side. So again, it's what is there is not as important in our minds as is it working the way it needs to.
And it's funny that you bring that up, especially on the protein side, because after I took your test, one of the things that came back was, I didn't have enough protein, and especially tryptophan in my blood markers and these metabolites that you guys test for. And I'm thinking about, like, I rack up the protein, right? And especially kind of with an active lifestyle, we've been conditioned to think that. So it was really fascinating to go through the process with your nutritionist to look at some of the things that I could do to increase my protein absorption, or I guess we would say bioavailability, versus just go throw on another, 16 ounces of steak or chicken every single day. So I think that's one of the kind of the things that really fascinate us about the microbiome, is this understanding that what we take in and what we process are two completely different things.
Correct. And your ability to process it, right? And that ability to process isn't just about what is there, right? So I might have 10 billion lactobacillus and you might have 8 billion lactobacillus, but if yours are working better than mine, then you're going to be getting a better outcome. And so what I mean is, it's not just about what is there, it's about how well it's working. And we're all just slightly different. And so there's many factors that play a role. And you have to understand both nutritionally, but also, inflammation, stress, dysbiosis, there are all these different factors that are at play. You have to be able to pinpoint what the specific problem is without guessing. And it's not fair to say, well, my problem is X. That must mean that everyone else has the same problem. That's not how, customized and personalized medicine works. So really being able to dig in and assess the root cause of the problem, and then being able to address it in a personalized way.
And it seems like modern Western medicine's, approach is just that. Well, it's like, well, this is the problem for one person, so it's got to be the problem for everybody, and therefore take this supplement, and everybody's going to be, whistling zippity doo out of their bunghole.
Well, I think there is a lot of misinformation too, because many people think, when they think, oh, I need, or I want a healthy gut or a healthy gut microbiome, I just need to take a probiotic, when that's truly not the case. Sometimes there are foods you need to remove. Sometimes there's things you need to add. And this truly is personalized, and it's not just as simple as taking a probiotic.
Right. And some people don't even need a probiotic. You actually do more damage than good by taking the wrong probiotic. And we always kind of tell folks, think about it the same way, right? If you take a probiotic that has maybe only 1 or 2 strains in it, and you're flooding your system with just the same thing over and over again, you are giving preferential advantage to that specific bacteria in your gut, which could potentially outcompete some of the other species that are in there that are more fragile. You could actually end up creating a dysbiosis by doing this without even knowing it. So, we say, don't do anything unless you've tested and there's actually a problem. You might end up doing more damage than good.
Amen.
Yeah.
We've been preaching that for a long time.
Yeah.
Therapy's intervention should only be based off of diagnostics. And I think that's one of the reasons we're so excited to have you here is we want to encourage everybody out there, all you guys listening. And of course, there's going to be a nice little code for you at the end of the show so that you can get your own test. But look, as we've been screaming from the mountaintops for a long time, is don't do anything unless it's diagnostic based. You don't need to, we joke about this, but how many people have such a high level of vitamin D during COVID because everybody said, well, vitamin D is good for COVID. It's like, how many people are taking 60,000 IU a day and wondering why they're hypercalcemic as a result of it?
Yes, everything is like that. I mean, again, we talk about, it's funny, I was giving a talk the other day, and we were talking about, serotonin, and or even melatonin, and being able to sleep, and people hyperdosing up on, certain, whether it's melatonin or, 5-HTP, and because they think that by taking more and more and more, they're going to solve the problem. I mean, it's just, supplements are still drugs. They're still medicines, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it just be careful with what you take. Don't take it unless you know you need it, and then be careful with how much, so that you're not again, doing more damage than good.
Well, and I think this is where we love what you guys do, right? And it's the test, optimized, retest, because there's no one thing that's going to last forever. And, maybe you need melatonin for a little bit, but that doesn't mean you need it every day. Maybe you need a probiotic just to create, to fix that dysbiosis. But as you pointed out, long-term interventions with some of those things could ultimately do more harm than good.
Right. I mean, I think the key, and we believe in retesting. That's the only way to know whether anything you've done actually has made a difference. So, you take the test, you figure out what's going on, you make a plan, make your changes, and then retest to see whether or not it's actually made a difference. And typically, the nice thing about this, though, it is complicated and there's a lot of science involved, but at the end of the day, proteins. We measure your protein levels are low. By eating more protein, you should be able to raise them. Or if your gut is in a state of dysbiosis, if you heal your gut, you should be able to fix that. And so again, what makes this nice is that it's actionable. There are simple things that you can do to actually make a difference. Yes, you have to do them. There isn't, it's not magic. We're not at Hogwarts here with a magic wand, but I think if you want and are willing to make some of these simple changes, it will work.
I'm really curious on the data side, what you guys have seen, people who take the test, make the changes, and then retest, and maybe they do that a couple times throughout their life. How does their, I guess, like other areas of their life improve, like mood or disease, or like, I'm super curious to see what you guys have seen on your end with people who have optimized their gut.
We've seen a lot of different things. So, I mean, there's weight loss, right? Folks who have optimized their gut, changed their diet, will gain weight. Folks who, again, make the changes, we've seen things like improved sleep, weight, thyroid related issues. A lot of the hormonal issues can be tied to gut health. So, and then, some medical issues too, right? So managing GI symptoms is typically a big one, especially for people who have, they've been to the gastroenterologist, they don't have any, serious disease state happening, and yet they feel a lot of discomfort. So why am I bloated? Why do I have gas? Why I have cramping? I have IBS. I don't know what's going on. So, by helping them find the right diet and adjusting that, helping them heal their gut, typically they might, they feel better. Thyroid related issues, a lot of it's tied to tyrosine. Tyrosine is an amino acid. So if you, do a little work there, you can fix that. A lot of hormonal issues. So perimenopause, menopausal women dealing with issues with weight, issues with sleep. Hot flashes are tied directly to serotonin. It turns out that serotonin is very important for thermal regulation, in addition to gut motility, making sure you go to the bathroom, but also like the mental and emotional side of things, anxiety, depression, stress, all of this. So, we have a pretty broad spectrum of folks from, those experiencing medical distress to, I'd say we call them, our athletes. So whether you're a pro athlete or whether you're just a passionate weekend warrior, folks who overdo it, sometimes they don't even know that they're overdoing it. And that actually hampers their performance because they're just doing too much. You tell them, well, take a day off, and they start performing better, which is a little weird, but true. And then, we have our mental athletes. So these are, career-driven people who are, putting in long work days, they're stressed out, and they don't, to some extent, they don't even know, they're so used to living this fast-paced lifestyle that until we really say, you got to slow down, because look at all your markers. They're all screwed up. Your gut's screwed up. And they're like, yeah, but I got to keep going. So helping them to find that balance so that they don't completely, burn themselves out. And then even pregnancy, like women who are trying to get pregnant or pregnant, your body changes, your need for certain nutrients change. For example, for what we've seen, a lot of the pregnant folks, their protein levels go straight down because you're building something and they're completely unaware that that's happening. And so you're really tired, fatigued, not feeling well because you don't have the right nutrition. So it's a pretty broad spectrum, of people who have reported both feeling better, but also doing better.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be really curious to also get your take on people that have taken antibiotics. I've heard and seen that, if you've taken some, sometimes you deal with some mood issues afterwards, depression, anxiety, but also some sort of research about if you've taken, you know, at least, you know, a round of antibiotics throughout your life, there's certain markers that just change drastically throughout your entire life. I mean, maybe you can heal your gut a little bit, but still you know, your immune system is down a little bit more than people who have never taken any. And if you take, you know, reoccurrent antibiotics, or if you're using them frequently, you know, what does that do long-term to our health?
So antibiotics are a great invention of the last, history, I don't know, but 100, 200 years, let's say.
Yeah,
So I don't want anybody to think it's not amazing that we have
correct.
that. The problem is that they don't differentiate between good and bad bacteria. So one of the common side effects of taking the antibiotic is that you get diarrhea. Why? Because all the bacteria in your gut are also being affected by them. So, you know, and then what happens is you could actually wipe out entire colonies of species, and usually they come back. It might take between 3, 6, 12 months to come back properly. And we've looked at that, you know, because folks in the office, in the lab, have been on antibiotics, and we immediately, you know, take their bloods and sample them, to see how long it takes. It takes a long time. But if you've been doing this for, you know, a year, 2 years, 3 years, you could end up really just wiping out your entire microbiome. If you do that, you suddenly become susceptible to things like eczema, things like autoimmune conditions, inflammation, you know, to your point, emotional issues, because you actually damage the lining of the intestine. And the intestinal lining is just one cell thick, super, super thin. So if you do anything to damage it, then what ends up happening is those cells that are closely packed together, they can start to separate a little bit, and it causes material to leak in between those cells. So rather than the nutrients being absorbed through the little finger-like projections in the small intestine called microvilli, those nutrients start to go in the wrong place. And what's actually living right below those cells is this area called the lamina propria. It's where your immune system hangs out. So if you end up with what's called leaky gut or any kind of intestinal permeability issues, it hyper sensitizes your immune system, because your immune system doesn't know the difference between that taco you had for lunch and anything else. So, you know, you end up creating inflammation right in the body. So it's so important to keep that intestinal lining healthy, to not wipe out the gut microbiome, because it can take a long, long time for things to come back. And then as it's healing, you're also not getting all the nutritional absorption that you need, because those bacteria are there to take the foods that you're eating, to break them down into an absorbable thing that your body can then use. If there's no bacteria there to break down the celery or carrots that you're eating, just an example,
Or the taco,
or the taco, I love tacos, then you get zero nutritional value from anything that you're eating. So it's kind of a two-pronged issue, right? What are you putting in, and what is actually being digested and absorbed? And those two things together have to work in concert with each other in order for the right thing to happen.
And with the prevalence of antibiotics being used, I mean, obviously, you know, since the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and I think that the medical community just, you know, without perhaps knowing, was like, let's just throw antibiotics at it. I mean, I remember even my daughter, she had a virus, and they're like, let's give her antibiotics. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you know, and I think back to a lot of friends that I know who have gut issues, and there's this trend of frequent antibiotic use as kids, as young adults. I know you've had that. So as you guys have tested this time and time again, what percentage of people really are suffering from perhaps a overuse of antibiotics that have led to gut permeability or leaky gut, or, you know, these things that we're talking about?
No, I don't know. I mean, we don't always ask that question, so I'm not entirely certain, but I would tell you that it's probably 10 to 20%, which is a pretty large percent of folks who, you know, whether you had recurrent ear infections as a child, you know, C-section babies have issues with gut microbiome, you know, issues, and are more susceptible to sickness and illness. You know, so there's definitely a cohort that grew up having taken these meds. And, I think part of the challenge is, physicians for again, not meaning badly, right? If the child has an infection or an adult has an infection and nothing is helping, then they give an antibiotic. Sometimes they do that because there might be a secondary infection, right? So you had that virus, and then underneath that virus, because that virus went too long, there's a secondary infection, but they don't always know. It's a little bit of a guess, right? It's just if your symptoms haven't gone away in a fast enough time, and to some extent, we're impatient. We don't want to be sick for longer than a week, right? The minute you're sick for longer than a week, you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. Somebody help me, give me something. And so the impatience of that, I think, makes the user go to the doctor too and demand for some of these things. And the doctor can't always just be like, no, I'm not going to give it to you. So there's a variety of factors, right, that cause this. And then, of course, too much antibiotic use means antibiotic resistant bacteria, which creates other problems. And but all of it wreaks great havoc, of course, on the gut microbiome.
Yeah. I'm really curious actually about how the gut microbiome is related to like skin microbiome, vaginal microbiome. I mean, there's many different microbiomes that we have. How different is it? And is there a correlation there? I mean, I feel like there would be, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, a microbiome, right, by definition, is just these critters that live in a specific location. So the gut microbiome are the ones that live in the gut. So that's why I started by saying the digestive system, and then all the stuff in the digestive system equals the gut microbiome. So those are the critters that live in that system. The skin microbiome is going to be, right, the critters and things that live on your skin. And they exist. It's kind of gross, but they exist. Same with the vaginal microbiome, right? There are critters that live down there too. And so you can have a dysbiosis of any kind. And I mean, I would say the vaginal dysbiosis can lead to things like yeast infections, right? So if the pH isn't quite right, or you have too many of one kind of microorganism and not enough of another kind, you get this overgrowth and you end up with, a yeast infection. So, are they related? I mean, I think they're different. Are there similar microorganisms involved? There's probably some overlap, but they're different in that you're not going to necessarily find the same stuff on your face as you would down below. But it depends, I guess.
Why are you patting my knee for that?
There. Like, we won't go there.
Are you trying to insinuate that I have vaginal dysbiosis?
No, I can just imagine where your head's going.
that would be a remarkable thing.
It really would, yes. But like and obviously I hope it's okay to share this, is that, when we look at the Zoom, it's your name and then she, her. If you look at mine, it is he, him. Is that it?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I that would be remarkable, since I do, for all intents and purposes, biologically and mentally identify with, the less than fair sex. The other side. Yes. The other side.
The other side. That's right. So, and a lot of it, I think the skin microbiome, though, is interesting, because a lot of the skin issues start out as internal dysbioses. Mm-hmm. So they manifest themselves topically, but often are a result of internal issues, right? So eczema is a good one. When you've got a specific inflammatory response or an allergy or something that triggers this condition, it starts with something going on, an imbalance internally that kind of comes to the surface, and you see it on the outside. And we have a tendency to treat it with like cream topically, but in order to really kill it, often you have to look kind of more systemically. Same with this is kind of gross, but like nail fungus in athlete's foot. Mm-hmm. Athlete's foot is a candida, it's a yeast thing. And you can use topical ointments and things to make it better. But if you really want it to go away, you gotta change your diet. You gotta
go inside.
You gotta go inside.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny, high school football, I remember, like after morning practice or afternoon practice, it just smells like that, that spray on Lotrimin stuff. Cause every guy at that point, it's a bunch of, guys going through puberty, eating nothing but pizza and Taco Bell. And, everybody's got athlete's foot. So you'd walk into the locker room and it's just this haze of Lotrimin. You're like, but
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And it's contagious, right? That's the other problem, because
Mhm.
the topical stuff is contagious, but the actual problem, in order to really kill it off, it's a systemic thing. It's the
and
same thing that causes yeast infections.
Mhm.
and these are the things we're not teaching people early on, right? So now, and I think that's one of the challenges is in our health system, we often address these things when it's too late. Whereas if we're proactively giving people a microbiome test, even as a kid, and I'd actually like to get your take on that, is when you could start doing it. But, at a certain point when we start proactively addressing health and wellness, then we can effectively, prevent a lot of the things that we see in modern society today.
I agree. It's just, that the sad part is people don't think that way, right? I think we like to believe they do, but they don't, right? I think it's until you have a pain point, you're kind of like, well, I'm invincible. And especially in your younger ages, your younger years, you kind of feel like you are, and you kind of are. You put your body through all kinds of, heinous things, and you're able to bounce back and feel better about it. Later on in life, things don't bounce back. You just bounce yourself, but nothing bounces back as quickly as it used to. And, until there's a problem, that's where people start to be like, ooh, I should probably actually pay attention, to this. Whereas, I mean, we know that, what is it, 80% of most chronic disease can be prevented simply by doing very easy, in many ways, easy things with our bodies, and just,
Mhm.
taking care of ourselves, staying in reasonable shape. You don't even have to be in top shape, but just in reasonable shape to prevent diabetes and heart disease. And, if you're overweight, all the pain on your joints. And I mean, it's just, these are all things that are to some extent somewhat preventable, but people are, I don't
They're
know,
stubborn.
they're stubborn. If you don't have to spend money on it now, then gonna go spend money on something else. Go buy
Well,
like
our
X.
favorite saying is pay for your health now or pay for your disease later.
Yeah.
Correct. And that's what happens.
And which brings us back to your test, right? So, you get this test in the mail, you send in a dried blood spot, and then, just really quickly, a couple of weeks later, you get this whole host of information. Now we had the benefit of working with one of your nutritionists who walked us through this test, and having taken other microbiome tests, I can tell you that there's a disconnect in the data and the actionable steps, right? Like you get these, I got a report of 1 trillion cells in my gut, and half the time we don't even know what those are because the artificial intelligences haven't caught up to what these things actually do. And then there's maybe a list of foods. And within that, I'm like, well, I don't cook. What the hell am I supposed to do with a list of foods? You guys really broke it down pretty simple. It's like you've got menu items, you've got some really cool stuff that makes it pretty simple to be like, okay, here's the problem, here's the solution, go off, do it, come back 6 months later, let's talk again. How did you guys come up with all of this data, and how did you correlate all the data to be able to make really concrete recommendations like that?
I mean, a lot of it is just trial and error, right? So you put forth a report and you talk to your customers about, did you actually use it? What did you do? How have you done it? And we really, in the last few months, even have been spending a ton of time on this side because, people, how do I say this? I think people have to be told what to do.
Mhm.
And they don't, you send them a 50-page report. Where do I begin? And in reality, what are you willing to change? What are you currently doing? What are you willing to change? And what are you not willing to change? And, we've been really kind of investigating as we've been toying with, is the product just a test? Is it a test plus a review? And we're kind of adapting, because I think the review is really important. The time that you spend with an individual who holds you accountable and who can walk you through and tell you this is what you need to do, because the report there's a ton of information in it, but shiny object syndrome too. Well, I could try this. And then then they try nothing, and then nothing gets done. So I think part of what makes these consumer tech products actually useful isn't just in the data. It's how that data is conveyed to the user so that the user actually does something with it. And that's the hard part. right? And you've mentioned you've taken all these tests, you get all this data, and you're like, okay, I looked at it for 30 minutes and I don't know what it all means. I don't even care. And now I don't even know what to do about it. And so it was cool for like an hour, and you spent your $300 or $700 or however much you spent, and you're never going to look at it again. And, both from the perspective of, the company that sold it, well, that was kind of a failure, but, for those companies who actually give a damn and want to help people to make changes in their lives, they failed. So, I think we're trying to figure out, how do you make it easy for people to do things, right? And whether it's changing your nutrition, getting a little bit more fitness in your world, or just meditating for 10 minutes a day. We're all different. And being able to know where to begin, right? So you have all these recommendations: do this first, do this second, do this third. And if you want to do more, you can come back with us and sign up for more. But like, keep it simple, right? It's the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. It has to be really, really, really simple for people. And hold them accountable. Right. So if you can work with an individual, it's so much easier because that person is there as your accountability partner. Did you do this? Did you do this? Until they're into a rhythm of doing it. But it has not been easy because, I think from my perspective, I'm a science dork. So I want to see all 50 pages of data. I'm going to dig through every single piece of it. But most people don't always understand all the science. So it has to be simple. Most people don't have the time to go and learn everything that you could possibly imagine, right? They want to be told, what do I do? Keep it simple, and go from there. And that's actually the hardest part about being in this area. It's the customer experience.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you say that, Erika. I'm a science dork too. And I remember I got my first microbiome test and I was looking at some of the bacteria and it would be like, no recommendations in the test because they didn't know what it was. And you'd go to Google and I'd type in that specific, microbe and there'd be like 3 things. Like, when's the last time you went into Google and typed anything and there wasn't like 3,000 pages? There was like 3 things. Like, nobody knew what it was. So like, the challenge obviously is that we have to understand these microbes and what they mean. We couldn't agree more on the accountability side. And actually one of the things that we're excited to tell our audience, as well as, that is that anybody who signs up for the Complete Human Infinite Wellness Coaching Program will get to take one of these tests. And then, that coach will be able to really hold people accountable to what these test results say. It's like one step at a time, one bite at a time. Like, let's focus on this thing this week, build a habit, and then from that habit, we'll build a strong foundation for change.
Correct. And there's 2 things that you mentioned that I just want to comment on. So more data isn't always better. More data isn't better when you don't know what it means. And I think part of the challenge with some of the, again, we come back, these are the stool samples, just listing off the bacteria that they found in your stool. Again, remember, in your stool, different from what is in you. And they don't know what it means. And to your point, you do Google search and you find these 3 papers or whatever, maybe they're not even papers, maybe they're just anecdotal, but more isn't better if you don't know why you're doing it. And we get asked, right, you guys measure 11 molecules. Is that enough? And, I think it's important to address that. So like I said, there's not one test that is everything, right? And to some extent, that's why when you go to the doctor and they measure your vitamin D or they measure your cholesterol, they do your CBC, your blood count, because all these different puzzles mean something different, pieces of the puzzle, and they all come together to tell a story about you physiologically. I would say this, though, that these 12 or 11 molecules that we test are precursors to really, really important things. So, and again, this is when you start digging into your results and you say, all right, tryptophan. Okay, tryptophan is an amino acid. It's essential. I have to get it from my diet. Why is it important? Well, because it's the precursor to about 50 other really, really important things, some of which are serotonin. So tryptophan is taken in by the bacteria in the gut and is converted into serotonin. Serotonin, we've talked about it, important for your mental, emotional health, gut motility. Serotonin is a precursor to melatonin, which is important for sleep. So if your tryptophan levels are off, it's likely that it's going to affect both your serotonin and all of what serotonin controls and your melatonin in your sleep. Tyrosine, another amino acid, is a precursor. Again, the gut takes in tyrosine and converts it to dopamine, which is that feel-good hormone that helps you, get up out of bed every day and go and feel happy about something. Adrenaline, epinephrine. These are all, downstream molecules that start with tyrosine. If your tyrosine levels are a disaster, it's likely that it's going to trickle down and affect some of these other systems' health. And so this is why when we talk with our patients and we say, well, tell me how you're feeling. And they say, well, I don't know what it is. I don't have motivation. I feel like crap. I don't have energy. When you look at their profile and, their tyrosine's low, their tryptophan is low. They've got some of their inflammatory markers are really, really high. And you say, you can piece together a really interesting story. And even with fitness fanatics, you say, all right, you see their xanthine is off the charts, their total indoxyl sulfate's off the charts. You say, how much cardio are you doing every day? And they're like, oh, like 7 hours of cardio every day. Okay, well, maybe we need to take a step back and reevaluate this. But people are often really surprised that we can ask very specific questions. And how did you know is what we always get asked. Well, because when you do a lot of cardio, your xanthine levels, it's biology, it's biochemistry, it's science.
Do it for science.
Do it for science. And you scale it back and you start to feel better and see these differences.
That's what I loved about the test and the results too, is it is simple, it's digestible, pun intended, since we're talking about the microbiome. But I remember like tryptophan was the one that we really focused on. And I noticed that just increasing tryptophan, same thing. It was like serotonin and melatonin. Like I'm sleeping better, and I was able to track that through my Whoop. I'm like, HRV starts to get a little bit better. So it's like, you can see it. And that's what I love about this. And, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls listening, is that's what makes this test so powerful, is that it's simple, right? We're not saying, here's a 50-page report, go figure all of this shit out. Like, here's some real simple, actionable things that you can do day in and day out to improve your health and wellness.
Correct. We like simple.
I do too. We need more simple.
Well,
I think everybody likes
it drives compliance too. I think it's just people will be better and they will stick to the plan better if they understand it more. I always say, education drives compliance. And I think when people know more and it's easier to follow, then it's easier to obtain what your goal is.
I agree.
Erika, we've got a couple questions from the audience before we, kind of have to part ways for the day. One that I got a couple on was the benefit of apple cider vinegar on the microbiome. And I swear this is like, well, I just want to, before I go off on this one, what are your thoughts on this?
I haven't researched it myself. You can read papers that go both ways. And some people react better to it than others. Some people, you take too much, you end up with acid reflux, you end up with indigestion, you end up with some people swear by it. So again, remember, we're all different. It's going to be very difficult to say that it's going to work for, you and your best friend and your mom and your dad and your kids. And so this is where, to some extent, I think taking the test, not that our test is going to tell you, whether or not you're going to respond well to apple cider vinegar, but I think if you have a gut dysbiosis, you could try it. And then you could see, how do I feel? It's one of those things where you can take, I think it's like a tablespoon a day, you dilute some with water, and you can try it and see. So my take on it is there's nothing bad in apple cider vinegar. Some people might react better, physiologically, it might work for them. It's supposed to help. We talked about yeast. It's supposed to help with candida, which is that same yeast that causes yeast infections. It causes, toenail fungus and athlete's foot. It's supposed to help with that. But, some people also, because it's vinegar, it's very, very acidic. So some people's gut may not like that. And that's just could be just physiology. So I know that wasn't a great and straightforward answer, but I think the answer is going to be different for each person. I don't think there's anything wrong with trying it and taking it. Make sure, if you're going to do it though, that you get the one that says, I don't know if you guys are going to laugh, but it says
with
like
the mother.
with the mother.
Yeah.
with the mother. So it has all of the little particulates and the goopy stuff in it, because that's the actual ferment. That's the fermented stuff. That's the good stuff. If you don't see good stuff floating around, you're buying the wrong one.
Yeah.
I made the mistake of buying the apple cider vinegar gummies, which then I'm just eating gummies, which I'm like, I think my blood sugar went through the roof. I'm like, there's no physical benefit or, physiological benefit. And my blood sugar is
It's
at
just
like 200.
candy.
Yeah.
It's
like
healthified candy.
Healthified candy.
Yeah.
You had a bunch of questions as well. Do you want to?
Yeah, I had one about food intolerances and food allergies, the microbiome. Is there correlation there? Can you help or heal food intolerances or allergies through the microbiome? Maybe allergies, not so much, but food intolerances, I know that leaks into the bloodstream. That's how you get those reactions. But wanted to get your take.
You can. So like I mentioned a little earlier, if you look at your intestine, and I know folks probably aren't going to see me doing this, but you've got these finger-like projections in your small intestine called microvilli. The purpose is to expand the amount of surface area in the small intestine so that all the nutrients get maximal absorption, right? So these cells, your intestinal epithelial cells, they're only one cell thick. And if you look at a cross section of the intestine from the side, imagine you've got these cells kind of stacked next to each other. And the cells are actually held together with structures called tight junctions. They're like little gates that hold the cells tightly together. As you damage your intestine, or if you damage your intestine, those cells start to separate. Those tight junctions start to become less tight. And as a result, food and particles, things like pathogens, viruses, whatever, they can also travel through. So people who have leaky gut are actually more susceptible to even, infections, getting sick, because there's just one more entry point that these pathogens can make into your body. Whereas the intestine is supposed to be a nice enclosed tube. It's not anymore. Now it has these leaky porous holes. But let's say, again, we come back to my taco. You've had your taco. The gut microbiome, which actually lives there's a mucosal, a very thin lining that covers the microvilli, so those little finger-like projections. The microbiome lives there. So this mucus is like this sticky goo. Probably when you blow your nose, you see what that is. It's like that same material. It protects the lining of these cells, the top of the cells. And the bacteria live there. They live in that mucosal barrier. So as the taco comes by, they digest it, break it down, break the meats and the lettuce and the whatever else is in your taco. And then those nutrients, the breakdown products, are absorbed through the microvilli and they go into your blood. Now, if you have leaky gut, those nutrients go in between the cells instead of in through them into that area below called the lamina propria, where 70 or 80% of your immune system lives. The immune system says, oh, that's foreign. That shouldn't be there, even if it's literally just, a tomato. And it starts to attack that. And so that's why people over longer periods of time, why is it that we typically are intolerant to foods that we eat a lot of? Because day in and day out, with our leaky guts, these bits of egg, breads, whatever, we're eating every day, milk, travel in between, and your immune system continuously attacks and attacks and attacks it to the point where it finally now is just hyperstimulated. So anytime you eat an egg or anytime you eat these foods, you have this sensitivity that is formed. So what you would do, first you have to heal the gut. So you need to close off that, prevent those tight junctions from being loose. You have to tighten those up again, make sure your intestine is properly healed. And then you can slowly, after taking a break from those foods, reintroduce them into your diet so that your immune system, won't immediately identify them as perpetrators. But typically sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but you have to heal the gut first, or else you're just going to the same cycle is just going to happen.
So we're about out of time, but I would love to, I'd love to finish up with that. Like, what are the top 3 things that the average person can do to heal their leaky gut?
Yeah. Well, so, I think the first thing, easiest thing is don't eat foods that are going to further damage it. Okay. So that's not a yes go to, but it's a don't do. So you're going to eat foods that are going to help to, help the gut to heal. So fiber rich foods, different types of foods. So variety, right? You have all these different bacteria, right? We talked about diversity. Some are going to eat veggies, some are going to eat meats, some are going to eat, right? So one easy thing you can do is go to the supermarket, buy different colored fruits and vegetables. Start there, because, add some color to the diet. We have a tendency to eat the same thing over and over and over and over again, which adds zero diversity and feeds the exact same bacteria and doesn't feed certain bacteria. So add some diversity to your diet, and just on the veggie side, because you can't really go wrong. And try adding some color. So that's one. Rest, meditation. If you, regardless of whether you're stressed out all the time, you're not, try to find something restorative to do, because there's the fight or flight, right? So there's this parasympathetic nervous system, so fight or flight, which keeps us always kind of on our toes and ready to go. But it would be really nice for our body to be in the rest and digest mode every so often. That's how you heal, right? That's where the cortisol response isn't going crazy. Your body isn't constantly sensitized to everything. So
is that even possible in today's society?
It is hard. Get a massage, go for a walk, sit in silence,
turn off the news.
Yes, turn off the TV, sit in silence for 15 minutes, or not even silence, but just like go outside and look at how beautiful, nature is. It really is. So just do something that is going to put your body into rest and digest instead of fight or flight. So that's like a number 2. And I think number 3, if you can get any kind of movement into your world, movement is great because it actually pushes things along. So digestively speaking. So when you exercise, it actually increases peristalsis, which moves your bowels. When things fester in the small intestine, large intestine, they kind of just sit there decaying, which is not great, because that, again, it can damage the ecosystem of the gut. You've got this like putrefaction happening in your intestines. You want to move all that stuff along as quickly as possible. So again, we're all different. Some people, when you say exercise, they go and run like 10 miles. You don't have to do that. Just do something with movement, whether it's some yoga, whether it's walking, running, swimming, just something to keep the gunk, to push that gunk out.
Man was not meant to be sedentary, man or woman. Sorry.
Exactly.
Erika, I think that's all the time that we have. I want to add to the top 3, and thank you for that, is obviously so much of the data that you and your team have put together allows people to make comprehensive decisions on their health and wellness, on the things that they can do to improve their gut microbiome and ultimately live healthier, happier lives, which is what we, hopefully advocate here at Complete Human, to educate and inspire healthier people for a healthier planet. With that in mind, we have a nice code for you guys to be able to improve it, or to get a discount, which we'll include in the show notes. Other than that, do you have anything else?
No, I think that was fantastic. Lots of great information.
Cool. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to another edition of the Complete Human Podcast with your host,
Jenna Breslin
and Evan DeMarco. We will see you next week.
Bye, everyone.